Hey everyone, Rachel Tobac here, Chair of the Board for Women in Security and Privacy, also known as WISP, and I want to tell you about an opportunity to get involved in the community. On Friday, June 26th, the security community came together to lift and amplify the stories and work of Black security and privacy practitioners on Twitter and LinkedIn through the hashtag #ShareTheMicInCyber campaign, which was organized by Camille Stewart and Lauren Zabarick. In response to this campaign, we started raising funds for Najla, who is my partner in the campaign, also known as 4Sci_Q on Twitter, to sit for the PMP, OSCP, and CISSP. We ended up raising the $2,000 to cover Najla's expenses, and we're now moving on to cover as many training, certification, and learning or advancement expenses as possible, incurred by Black security and privacy practitioners in the Share the Mic and Cyber group. As of right now, on July 6th, we have $16,000 raised and about $26,000 in needs for the community. Please consider a donation or a corporate sponsorship to cover these expenses. You can head on over to tinyurl.com/sharewisp for our donation page, or you can go on our Twitter page @wisp.org so you can see the full donation link yourself. You're security-minded, probably want to see the full URL. I get it. Thanks so much for taking action, and I'll see you on the internet.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the hosts' past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian, Mr. Betcher, for Breaking Down Security.
Hello.
Hey. Long weekend here in the U.S. We had the 4th of July Independence Day celebrations. Most people had Friday the 3rd off. I actually took a mental health holiday on the 6th, and we're recording on the 7th actually here. So, Mr. Betcher, how did you and your family fare over the 4th of July holiday?
We did great. We just kind of had a little private thing out in the country and had a couple of meals, hung out. Yeah, it was really great.
Nice. Yeah,
no big crowds and all that, of course,
yeah,
because of the current situations, but
yep.
It was fine.
Cool. Yeah, our city we live in up here, it's called Snoqualmie, is they normally have a fireworks thing to kind of dissuade people from having their own private deal, and because of the COVIDs and all that, they said, oh yeah, no, we're not going to have that this year. Go ahead and do your own thing. And yeah, thankfully they set a deadline of midnight so that we didn't have to hear it overnight. But yeah, for about 3 hours, our cats and freaking out and all that. So it wasn't awful. It could have been much worse than what it was, but yeah, it was much subdued than what I expected. So. Doesn't help that it was in the mid 50s. What's about 12°C for those of you using Celsius here. It hasn't become summer yet for us. We're still kind of stuck in kind of spring, I think. So
yeah, I don't see why they couldn't have a come in your own car and stay in your car. You don't have to get out and mingle.
Yeah,
right? But you can watch the fireworks from your vehicle.
Yeah, I wished that drive-in movie theaters were still around. We have some in Missouri where I used to live. But yeah, I think there, if this is going to be around for any length of time, there needs to be a renaissance of the drive-in movie theater where you can go, park. I think I heard that like Walmart was trying to do something similar, using their parking lots as drive-in movie theaters, like impromptu theaters. So you come, you drive, they put a small FM transmitter in, you go in, tune your radio to 87.9 on the FM dial, and you can hear the movie, and then you would bring your own stuff potentially and eat. But yeah, instead of going to a regular movie theater or I guess the other reason would be to make out and stuff, but how you used to do it, drive-in movie theaters. But yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that being a thing for families if they wanted to just get out for a couple hours from the house. So, but yeah. All right. Well, so Miss Berlin, the last message I got from her said she was at an Airbnb, but the internet was crap. And I did invite her, but yeah, she did say her internet was crap. So we're going to be, she's on an island somewhere doing an Airbnb. So maybe she's in such a remote spot that the internet's not working. So, but we'll have her back very soon. Next week, hopefully, we're gonna have a pretty big interview with. Cross our fingers. It's going to be the Ripple 20 writers, authors, and we're going to talk about some of the timeline for that. So that'll be an interesting show. So.
You just jinxed it. Man.
Shut up, dude. Come on, man. I want to believe that it's going to happen. I'm so happy and confident it's going to happen. That's why I decided to announce it like that.
The power of positive thinking.
Exactly. Right? Think, what is it? Plan, do, check, act, or something like that. Yeah. So, improvise, adapt, overcome. Yeah. All right. So, last week, you might have heard us talk about the PanOS SAML vulnerability a little bit. I put a little disclaimer in on Monday morning because we actually wanted to wait and make sure that it kind of was worth the hype. Depending on who you talk to, there's a lot of people that says it doesn't live up to the hype. And so we're just kind of giving a little update on this. There's actually a couple of podcasts I was listening to that had issued retractions because they did a lot of speculation and come to find out nothing really came of it. So
what was the hype ranked as far as the score?
So I'm going to quote a lot here from Ryan Newington, who was on Twitter, and he put out a big thread about what the SAML thing was. So the issue in CVE 2020-2021, he got his last two numbers up backwards on that, but he says there's a lot of confusion about the role of the disable cert validation checkbox in this issue. TLDR, having this turned off is a standard expected and not a bad practice. The issue comes from the digital certificates, which in many cases you have to treat like, you have to think of the digital signing cert like an SSL cert. That's what he says here. He said, I'm sure there's others besides Palo Alto that do it, but having the digital signing cert validated like an SSL cert is a little strange. Most implementations don't offer the ability to turn this on, let alone turn it off. That is why the guidance from most setup guides call for disabling this. It's standard practice for the identity provider to self-sign its own signing certs, and that doesn't need to change. So I have a separate rant on this because I have seen more than one vulnerability in the last couple years that has either been overhyped or misunderstood, but it sounds like this SAML vulnerability did not need to be a CVSS level 10. Let me see if they've downgraded it since 2020, 2021. Let's see. Yes, I visited this page 2 times. Yeah. Here. No, they don't have it updated here. Let me see. Security. They're still calling it a critical. I don't know why Palo Alto is considering it a critical. I mean, even they themselves say, when it's enabled and is disabled unchecked, improper verifications enables. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure why they're considering it a 10, but it seems like a lot of people are like, yeah, this really doesn't qualify as a 10. It just seems like there's a lot of weirdness about it. I don't know. Says you haven't made a bad decision by turning certificate validation off. You didn't do anything wrong. Your identity provider or vendor didn't mislead you with a bad. He says DOCO. I don't know what a DOCO is. Thank you for if you're hitting your phone. He says, once patched, it's completely okay to leave certificate validation off. This is, in fact, a more standard behavior for a SAML service provider. So, yeah, I mean, just not validating the certs. It seems like that somebody did not really understand what exactly the vulnerability did, or the setting inside that did. So it's good to have this post-mortem stuff, but having it as a level 10 when it doesn't seem like it's a level 10 is off. So I'm sure we can all find examples of vulnerabilities like that, or we find vulnerabilities that are in the other direction. It's like a CVSS 3, and there may be like a typical Oracle thing where there's 100 vulnerabilities, and if you could chain a bunch of 3s together, you get a 10. Separately they're 3s. So I have a thing that maybe we need to get rid of the scoring system in some cases, or get rid of the medium, high, low thing and just use it as a CVSS number to catalog the vulnerability. That way people can, and then people can make their own judgments on those, because there's a lot of them out there that, like this 10, if you have it in a PCI network, for instance, they're going to expect you to fix that, even though, according to Ryan Newington, not a huge deal. But because it has a 10 on it, that's all that the compliance folks care about.
And you have to fix it. Not only do you have to fix it, but you have to fix it really fast.
You have to fix it yesterday. Some of those, it's like you have to fix it in a certain amount of time, and you either get a mitigation, which sometimes you don't even get those, or you have to wait for a patch, which thankfully Palo Alto's had this embargoed for several months now, which is the other thing. It's like they've had several months of embargo on this that hasn't been released. Why? Did somebody not do some research, or they could have released it and said, oh yeah, it's not best practice, it's a configuration issue, you can turn it on or turn it off, but it just seems to me there's a lot going on there that needed to be looked at in a more a finer tooth comb there. So, or it needed to be looked at a little better. That's all. So
yeah, I never did like the scoring system, because one person's 10 is another person's 0.
Right.
So it's all relative anyway. So.
Right. And, for that to, for some of these vulnerabilities, the 9s and the 10s are, sometimes they assume, like if it's an RDP bug, for instance, the conditions for it are like the server needs to be exposed to the internet with nothing in front of it, no firewalls, no WAFs, no technology, no other mitigations in the case. It's just like you can type 12.12.12.12. Apologize if your company uses that IP address, and there's an RDP server there, and it's like, oh great, okay, but I don't want to say most companies don't have that, but if you've got a firewall, or if you've got some other control in place, those things drop fairly quickly. The problem is, what does the mitigation turn your CVSS 10 into? Does it turn it into a 7? Does it turn it into a not a problem anymore? That's something that we've always seemed to have a problem with, is trying to figure out how much the mitigations actually reduce the severity of the bugs. Is it turning it from a critical to a high, or critical to a low, or critical to a medium? I mean, where does it drop that, and how do we codify that and make it so that that's the case?
Yeah, and what are you risking trying to patch it in a hurry like that?
Right. For
potentially no reason.
Right.
I mean, because we all know that today's problems are yesterday's solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And, maybe the mitigation opens up something else. Just throwing out a blind mitigation or something that hasn't been tested thoroughly, can cause other issues as well. Maybe, causes CPU load to increase if you're, trying to create a workaround, or maybe maybe there's some additional vulnerabilities that get added, or maybe the mitigation is put out there and it was a red herring, or can be easily bypassed because somebody doesn't realize that you can, maybe a special character, or maybe a WAF rule can be bypassed, for instance. So it's just kind of an interesting deal. So Hopefully you've found the time before the holiday last week to patch your Palo Alto boxes. If not, I don't know. I would look and make sure that this really is an issue for you. If it isn't, I would definitely write up some justification if you don't necessarily. I'm not saying don't patch, but I mean just think about it before you have to. It wasn't the only vulnerability that they issued that was legit. So this don't patch based on this one vulnerability. Patch, like most things on a patch Tuesday for Microsoft or a CPU from Oracle. You've got 500 vulnerabilities at any one time. You should probably be worrying about the CVSS 3s and 5s, not the CVSS 10 that really maybe isn't, because chaining those things together, all you need is a low-level access or the ability to run something as an unprivileged user, and then you're in with the other chains. So,
speaking of being in as an unprivileged user, if you have F5s.
Oh no! Oh man, you just rubbing salt in that wound, ain't you? Yeah. You didn't have a good weekend over the 4th of July if you were an F5 employee. Yeah, and this one was probably a really bad one. So maybe you talk about it there a little bit, Mr. Betcher.
What do you mean, me talk about it? Well, I know some other teams in my company had to mitigate this situation early this week. So I didn't, I was not involved in this.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So on support.f5.com, because I was wanting you to, kind of, vamp for me while I went and picked this up. So according to CVSS v3 score, this is a 10 for any system of big IP running on 15.x, 14.x, 13.x, 12.x, or 11.x. The fixes were introduced in 15.1.0.4, 14.1.2.6, 13.1.3.4, 12 and 11. If you're still using those, is pretty old. So, look at getting updated. Big IP or big IQ centralized management traffics SDC are not vulnerable. And if you're running the 16.x branch of big IP, including LTM, AAM, analytics, DNS, FPS, link controller, etc., version 16 is not vulnerable. But if you have any one of those other versions, patch, because the vulnerability itself actually ended up in the space of a tweet. Somebody had tweeted out the actual, URL that you need to make it happen, and you can put LFI. So LFI is local file include. So you can read files off of the system, including things like Etsy password, Etsy hosts, or it says /config/bigip.license. So I'm assuming that's your license key in the config directory. Free keys for everybody. Yeah. So it starts out, so the LFI, the local file include, is HTTPS, the IP address /TMUI/login.jsp/ and then ... and then a semicolon, and then TMUI /local LB/workspace/ file read.jsp, file name equals etsy.password. So it's the same thing for the RCE, except you're using tmsh command.jsp. So there's it's a JavaScript. Looks like it allows you to run JavaScript commands on the system itself from the web UI. The semicolon obviously changes it acts as a command combiner, so it's like
a terminator.
It's a terminator.
Command terminator.
Yeah, it allows you to run something else again. So there must be some kind of Unix command that's being ran, or some method by which you can, terminate that command. So it's like ls:more. So you're running the list files in that directory, and then you're doing more, whatever the file name is, or something like that. Pretty nasty. I mean, this is probably better documented and just as bad, or if I would say definitely worse than the SAML vulnerability. No doubt, because you don't need to have. I don't believe you need to have any kind of access to do this, which is why it's level 10. So you just need to know the IP address of the big IP system. And since it's a boundary device anyway, there's probably not much in front of it. There's a link in our show notes to Team Aries Sec Twitter. They had posted a video on it. NCC group had posted that their honeypots had been hit this weekend. They actually put a post out on the 5th, which is Sunday here in the States, about somebody attacking their honeypots, dealing with network devices, and found that. So the write-ups from Wired and from NCC group are in the show notes. The workaround is a redirection a rule in your web server on your F5s that says if location match is a semicolon, then redirect that directly to 404. And that's a mitigation if you can't immediately patch your F5 boxes. But definitely try to do what you can to get patched as soon as possible.
It is really interesting that they have this TMUI, where you type HTTPS, then the IP, then TMUI, then you get a login. TMUI stands for Traffic Management User Interface. But if you go to TMUI /local IB /workplace, then you have this TMSH, which in theory stands for Traffic Management Shell. Command.jsp, which allows you to just type commands. I mean, there's a JSP page right there for you to access, TMSH command, and then you just type your command.
Yeah.
It's just so cool.
Well, I mean, my wireless router that I have, I I upgraded to Google Mesh, but I had a couple of Linksys ones that had in the UI, you could go to 10.10.1.1 or whatever the hell I had, IP address range for that. And you could do things like ping, and it would bring up a web page with a text box, and it would be like, type in the command you want to use. And it was a way of troubleshooting the network connection or the internet connection if something failed, and you'd type in, ping google.com, and then the page would refresh and it would show you your ping if the test worked, or, if you were trying to, run a DNS or an NS lookup against something. So, I mean, those were in there, and you were probably running as root when this happened, just like what you're seeing right here. This is obviously running with some kind of escalated or elevated privilege, either as a service account. God, I hope it isn't running as root, but
you're running with the privileges of the application itself, which is the F5 application. Now, this is an appliance, so it would have pretty much root access. I know developers write applications, and they leave themselves little backdoors for troubleshooting, testing, getting out of crash type situations like, oh crap, my app isn't running properly. Let me go to that page that I put and issue some commands because I can't access the machine. I don't have rights.
Right.
That's for the support teams, that administer, like the Linux guru or whatever, that has system access. But as far as the app goes, well, how do you, if you've got a system that needs to be up 24/7, how do you troubleshoot your application if you don't have access to the server, and you're able to eliminate, oh, is this a server issue or is this really an app issue? What's going on with the server? So they have been known, developers, and I'm one of them, to leave themselves some ways to troubleshoot their application. And this looks kind of like one right here. I mean, should you be able to just access the system that's running the application, the F5 application, directly from the application?
Right.
Probably not. I don't think that's a good practice, but here it is. Yet another one. And I've seen these before.
Yep. Yeah. And those were only the two, JavaScript applications that they found in that directory. There's probably a number of other things that could be done in there if that's the the URL, or that's the location for say it's the administrative interface and it's just calling the JavaScript to make it work. There could be a bunch of other items in there to be able to do things like change network routes or
that's pretty much all you need. Those two, you can read files with the first one.
Yeah.
The second one, you issue commands. What more do you need on a terminal?
Right. Well, I mean, so according to the Wired article, the attacker could redirect traffic to a server under their control, could be used to inject malicious content. According to Joe Slowick, security analyst at Dragos, in the Wired article, that's what he said. It gets really scary really quickly. He says the good news is only a small minority of F5 devices that have web-based management exposed to the internet. So that's the other problem. Misconfigured network device that has web-based management interface exposed to the internet. So the other thing to help mitigate this would be to not have that exposed on your main IP address, and that's pretty much, I would say, the
defense in depth.
It would be defense in depth, but that's I don't want to say it's network security 101, but you should never have any kind of web-based interface exposed to the internet. You should have a requirement to VPN into a management network or something like that, and then access whatever it is you need there in that respect. Or, maybe you turn off the web-based management altogether and just use SSH or something like that. If you have to have some kind of management interface in that way. But yeah, if only a small minority of big IP devices that have their management interfaces exposed, let me see, what does it say? According to Positive Technologies, which is mentioned in the Wired article, 8,000 devices worldwide. Shodan found that 40% of those are in the U.S., along with 16% in China, single-digit percentages around the globe. So for the 40% of people in the U.S., your weekend got ruined because y'all didn't do what was necessary to secure your devices when you set them up. Maybe you didn't know about it. Maybe it was left over from old kid or old thoughts. But yeah, you probably should go through this week and not just your F5 devices, but check all of your network devices. Anything with a management console with an external IP. Maybe you should turn that off, turn the management interface off, or point it to a management network that only certain people can get to. Don't allow those kinds of interfaces to the outside world if you can keep from it. So so NCC Group warned in a blog post that they posted on July 5th, they saw a spike in their exploitation attempts on its honeypots, which are bait devices designed to impersonate vulnerable machines. They saw even more attempts on Monday morning. Monday morning is because everyone else was out, having fun on the weekend, and people come back to work and found that their, some of their scripts actually worked to find bad things. So. A lot of organizations are going to come in after this weekend and not be in patching mode, but in incident response mode. Yeah, especially if they could find those on Shodan and it was that easy to do. So, maybe, you know what? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, if you can remote code execution directly from the internet, that's pretty bad.
It don't get much worse than that. I mean,
there's no hoops to jump through or anything.
Yep. Hopefully you would, if the people, watching your network cued in on that, they'd be able to find out fairly quickly. But the other thing is, hopefully you're not using any kind of single factor for authentication purposes. You may not need authentication in that case, but that's another thing. That's the other reason why your web-based management interfaces need to be behind additional controls, because they could run that without being logged in. That's just the kind of things that can pop up.
So the fix is, instead of requiring 1 semicolon, it's 2 semicolons. Nobody will figure that out.
You're a bad man. You're a bad man. Oh my goodness. It just sucks that this came out on a long holiday like this. Everybody's. It'll be interesting to see if we hear of any breaches that have happened in the next couple of weeks that people are now trying to figure out if they've been owned or not. Yeah. Let's see what else. We've got a link in the show notes to the tweet for the proof of concept for the LFI and the RCE. I can't confirm this, but I thought I saw on Twitter, InfoSec Twitter being what it is, that there was use of the POCs in a very popular bug creation framework that's out there. I don't know if it was added as a Metasploit module or what, but I thought somebody had said, oh yeah, it was somebody had added a module to it over the weekend into Metasploit or something. So, this one is the worst kind of 10, I think. You've got obvious point of proof of concept code. If it's in Metasploit, that means the skiddies have access to it. If you aren't, doing proper,
it wasn't easy enough.
If it isn't easy enough, it's already in Metasploit, which means the skids have it. If that's not the case, then I apologize to the people who run Metasploit, but there's already proof of concept out there, so it wouldn't take much for somebody to create, to automate this or to, make it so that it could just be, owned from a distance. So, let me see. One last thing. So let me see what we're on in time. Okay, we're at 31 minutes. That's cool. So there was a tweet. We're going to shift gears here from, vulnerabilities and stuff to more philosophical nature. We had it's Twitter user Dat Security Chick. Tracy is I think local here to Seattle. She's a pretty awesome lady. And she had a question. She said, hey, InfoSec, helping a newish person stuck in an unwinnable security situation. She did mention in the Twitter thread that it isn't her. It is actually a friend. Culture isn't supportive. Tech debt's everywhere. No one wants to do the right thing. What's your best coping tip? Whoops, my bad. So I actually replied because they said the newest person's in an culture isn't supportive. Tech debt's everywhere. Nobody wants to do the right thing. I don't have a lot of information, but one of the things I did suggest was that if the culture is that bad, if things aren't where they need to be security wise, and there's tech debt and everything, I expected, and I've worked in places that I probably would consider to be not a good fit culture-wise in the past. And I said I would document everything, including decisions that her or their management would balk on, embrace open source tooling if they don't pay for any kind of additional tooling. And I'm always a fan of turning things off if they're not using them. Why let them run on the network, and if they're not useful. So I did get a couple of people who agreed with me on that, but I wanted to find out, Mr. Betcher, you've been in security and development a bit longer than I have. Do you have any thoughts on that from a different point of view there?
Well, the key word here is newish person. So I think it's easy for somebody who is new to walk into security and say, well, this is important to me, so it should be important to the company. And I'm not being listened to. I'm being shoved aside, and I don't understand why, because this vulnerability or whatever it is needs to be fixed. Otherwise, it could turn into a huge problem. And so, yeah, I can sympathize with that. The issue that may be the case, and I don't know any specifics, just from the reading of the public posts of what's going on, but it's more likely that the new people in security are potentially making it a bigger situation than maybe it needs to be, or they're not taking the entire company or IT infrastructure as a whole and factoring the capabilities of all the teams and the all the mitigations that may be in place. Maybe it's an internal vulnerability, and they have other issues externally that they need to fix, right? I don't know. Maybe it is an F5 that needs to be patched, right? Because of a remote code execution over the internet, or they have RDP exposed, things like that. So without knowing exactly what it is, I can't really say if it's a really serious, legitimate thing that needs to be fixed, or if the full context needs to be taken into account and say, okay, wait a minute here. I know that it's important to you, but it may not be feasible to fix this right now.
Right.
Because there may be risks to fixing it, or whatever the case may be. We don't have the resources to work on it right now because we're going to fix it in a couple of weeks because we're releasing a new application. So we can't patch this now. It'll take time and resources. There's some risk involved. I don't know the situation. So without knowing, I can't really judge whether it's, something that really needs to be harped upon from a security standpoint, or, hey, let's sit down and talk about this and take the entire company, the profit and loss, all that stuff. I mean, because it is a larger organization than just the security team.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the things that's and I'm gonna be real with y'all here. Sometimes I make decisions, or I suggest things that don't get done because I often don't see the big picture, or there's other things in play there that I was not aware of. Sometimes in an organization where there's communications issues, management may not necessarily communicate everything that's going on, and that's something you have to learn to deal with and plan for in some cases. I don't know in terms of culture isn't supportive, if that's typical. What I'm thinking of in terms of support, culture isn't supportive is that, maybe somebody's asking for improvements that is not being thought of or dismissed out of hand. Somebody had mentioned sometimes it takes a business reason to drive change. 907 to the 703 is the Twitter user who put this down. Do a disaster recovery plan, potentially. When it goes up the chain of command, they could go out of business because of technical debt. I wouldn't spread FUD. I would just, try to, it may take a little while to put out a white paper on why we need X technology, or why we should get rid of X technology, or why we should invest in these technologies. I would document everything. So if you say, hey, we need to patch, like you said, if we need to patch this F5 server because, here's a article to the vulnerabilities, and they say no, you need to make sure that you have your own ass covered in some cases when, if something worse, if the non-patch turns into an incident response because law enforcement's knocking on your company's door because, hey, we found, all of your stuff in this environment, or your company was being used to do DDoS attacks or something. It's important to have those in many cases, just cover your own ass and say, hey, look, we asked to patch it on Thursday and we were told, yeah, not right now. It's not important. Then, when lessons learned comes out later on, because, during incident response, you typically aren't placing blame. It's in the lessons learned area of why this happened. How do we stop it from happening again? What processes failed, etc. We can say, look, we asked to patch on Tuesday. Nothing was going on that day. There was nothing in the change window that would cause this to be an issue. And we were told no because it wasn't really a big deal.
And keep in mind, even if you do document it and say, hey, I told you so, then they could just come right back and say, look, you may have told us to patch, but you didn't communicate that well enough to where the organization understood how critical it was. So ultimately, it's your fault for not communicating properly.
Yep.
That could come back on you too. So it is a situation that requires maybe some diplomacy here.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
So it does take communication skills. That's why it says on the job application, must have communication skills or whatever.
Yep.
So, so you're able to convince in a intelligent way how critical it really is, and do your research before you come up and not spend political capital on something that really isn't that harsh to begin with.
Yeah. And like you said with the I told you so thing, you may be right, and you may have the emails that show that yes, you were correct and you told them that. Is that a hill you would like to die on in that case? I could understand it if there was a problem where, you were told to patch, or you wanted to patch but couldn't, and then something bad happens. If you're just trying to make sure you're saving yourself, then that's fine. But you've got to, I would say, pick your battles in terms of, you may be right, and you may have an "I told you so" email, and you may win that argument, but you're going to lose the war in terms of building relationships with your people. You're gonna. I worked at places for years where it was like, look, we need to patch these things, and like, well, we can't do that because of technology stack, or patching it with this latest version of whatever breaks our builds. And it's like, okay, well, we can't do that, and that goes back to the mitigation stuff like we talked about earlier. You're going to have to do some creative thinking. You may have to embrace some open source tools that will help shore up your defenses, because, and that's where threat modeling might come in. When we have this piece of technology, we have this software, we can't patch it. If F5 has a vulnerability over the weekend and allows them to do X, Y, and Z, what are our additional protections in place? You may have to implement some stuff that adds additional, like Mr. Betcher said, defense in depth. But yeah, there's a lot going on there. I was trying to see if somebody else had replied to the discussion to get some additional context.
Well, I like InfoSec Charlatan's response. Let me one more time. Helping a newish person who's stuck in an unwinnable security situation. First of all, is it unwinnable? Culture isn't supportive, tech debt everywhere. No one wants to do the right thing. So InfoSec Charlatan said, coping wise, acknowledge early on that security is a business decision.
Right.
And the decision to accept risk can be the correct one.
Right.
Our job is to identify and communicate that risk, and not to determine the risk appetite for the org.
Oh yeah.
So I think identify and communicate, that pretty much sums it up.
Right.
We need to be able, from from our intelligence, from our knowledge, from our education background, to identify the appropriate risks and to communicate them effectively. I mean, that's what we do.
Yep. InfoSec Charlatan is I'm now following them on Twitter. So the other thing was the attempt to find a way to tie business outcomes to security progress. This can be discussing security as a differentiator, quote unquote, to sales, marketing, talking to audit and pointing them to problem areas, or talking to about business impact of major breaches. So yeah, those are definite ways that you can use. A lot of people consider compliance and audit as a big giant hammer, and we're all a bunch of nails. But if it is something that you feel strongly about, you could always go and talk to them and see what the implications are of, something happening. And again, you don't want it to be, oh my God, the sky is falling, or the boy who cried wolf every time. You want to kind of pick your battles on those. If it's something that's really going to be a problem, and, like web interfaces on the net, exposed to the internet, we need to have RDP exposed to the internet because our CEO needs to do X, Y, and Z. Well, great, your CEO needs to do that. CEO is going to have to accept that. And, you may be able to go to compliance and go, look, this RDP system is in our PCI network, and it's the CEO is using an S3 bucket with to put all of his super secret documents in, and it's like, we need to get rid of that. And those are definitely things that you could point out and say, look, here's an open S3 bucket, and there was a bunch of stuff in it, and it got breached, because it's easy to enumerate those things. And this is a risk, and this is what is in that S3 bucket right now, and what is the impact if somebody like our competition or nation state got access to that information. And
and you should highlight what's the worst that can happen, and what are the odds that worst thing can happen.
Right.
And you could give examples. Here's an S3 bucket that was found by company X,
right? And
they were all over the papers, and they got fined $3.5 billion or whatever it is.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the thing about the documentation. You go in, you plead your case. Hey, S3 buckets being open and world readable are bad. And in many cases, try to discuss try to be realistic, and then that also covers your own butt, because if something does in fact happen, somebody comes back and goes, why didn't you tell us about this? I did. It's right here in this email. Apparently nobody read it. I do know things like Outlook 365 is now keeping track of analytics for people for emails for 15 people out of the 45 that you've done have clicked on this. It's kind of interesting. It's not a read receipt. It's just like they've clicked on it and they use that. So, you could, set up for specific emails that are going out, analytics. It's like, well, I sent this out to 50 people talking about the S3 bucket vulnerability, and looks like only 2 of you read it. So obviously it was either not worth reading, or, somebody didn't think it was important at the time. So you can always, show that in terms of, due diligence. Let me see who else. Some of this input is interesting. He said something very similar, except I wouldn't be the asshole in this case, as he said on number 3 there. Ask why they don't want to change and work around the problem. Speak their same language. Example, an incorrect SPF record went ignored for months despite me insisting on an easy fix. Not a real scam. Went through and impacted more than $1,000 if they believe me. Build trust over time. And that's true. If you are newish, it does take time to generate trust and with your organization. Again, I don't know what the unsupportive culture portion is, if it's just, good old boy kind of thing, or if it's, something else that's going on there that might require an HR visit. If you think strongly enough about the culture's not a good fit for you, there's always, things are starting to get back to normal. Companies are hiring. So, dust off your resume, start looking around. If you haven't been there for very long, see if you can lump it for another few months and try to get a year out, and then start looking again. So that's always helpful. Any other thoughts there?
No.
Cool.
Say my piece.
I would say the one last thing you might try is if you have a regular pen test firm come in to do stuff, maybe you point them over in that area. The biggest, don't hesitate to use your pen test, your regular pen test firm as an indicator of change. So
that's what they're there for.
Yep.
I mean, you give them some hints and say, look, I'm really concerned about this. Could you, do me a favor? They'd love to do that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm not telling you to go look over at this server, but that server, you should probably look at that server and, make that a thing. So, yeah.
Pay no attention to that server.
Yep. Yeah. So the good thing is I wasn't off. A lot of people are saying documentation is the key. Get explicit refusals to do the right thing. Find an advocate if you can. Go talk to finance or general counsel potentially, but try not to appear to be going over people's heads. Go to events, learn, keep your skills sharp and ongoing. Yeah, if the good fit's not good for you and you're just biding your time until you can find a better position with a better security culture, continue to work on the side, building up your skills. Work with the tech and the stuff that you have in your own office there to build up your skills in firewall, rule detection, SIM and logging and all that stuff. And start building your resume for the next job that you want, not the current job that you have in that case. So I think that's all I have. All right. Mr. Betcher, there's a lot going on this week. So tell us how people can get a hold of you and talk to you, and tell us a little bit about what your LogMD is all about.
Okay. Yeah. You can get a hold of me from log-md.com. My Twitter is @Betcherpwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. LogMD is a log and malicious discovery tool, which and with the help of Michael Goff, we created this tool to help incident responders, threat hunters, and the like, anyone in security with Windows endpoints to discover and help detect malicious content.
Cool. Okay. Right on. So Miss Berlin, of course, is involved in the Hackers Health organization, which is trying to spread awareness for mental health issues in the InfoSec and hacking communities. She's started that with Megan Roddy, one of our moderators and a really awesome person in our Slack. And you can find Miss Berlin and Hackers Health and InfoSec. I think it's InfoSec D&D. She also does if you have a conference that's virtual, or if you're brave enough to try doing one in person again. I think it's InfoSec D&D on Twitter. InfoSec D. Damn it! I'll have to find it. You can find her at Hackers Health or InfoSystir, INFOSYSTIR. I'll find a link and put it in the show notes for the InfoSec tabletop role-playing game that she does. That one's pretty fun, and you can always check that out and find out more about that from her. So thank you to the people on our Slack. We have a very active Slack community. A lot going on there. We are, I think, almost finishing up our book club. We'll be looking for other options and opportunities for other books to read. We get on Zoom and we go through a chapter or two at a time. Moderators, we have Paige and David Sybuck and Scott Pack in them doing the book club. So you just buy the book, either the ebook or the Dead Tree version, and go through that. And it's a good way of keeping your skills sharp. The next one I think we're going to be doing is a little more technical. The one we were doing before was technical too. I guess it was pen testing AWS environments. That was a Pact Publishing book. But you can I think we have it narrowed down to what we're going to do. So come and join us on our Slack. You can DM us on our Twitter at BrakeSec, BRAKESEC, or you can email bds.podcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter as well. I'm at Brian Brake, BryanBrake. Let me see. We have a TeePublic store. If you're looking for t-shirts, or if you don't have enough stickers, you can go on there and get a t-shirt or stickers or coffee mugs or pretty much any kind of paraphernalia you'd like. That link is in the show notes. You can go and check that out. Let me see. What else? Did I forget anything, Mr. Betcher?
I don't think so.
Oh, yes, I did forget one thing. So Rachel Tobac, who is one of the organizers of WISP, which is Women in Security. WISP. Let me go double check that. I don't want to get acronyms wrong. You know how I am about acronyms. WISP.org stands for. I just love. There we go. WISP. There it is. Women in Security and Privacy. I was trying to figure out what the P is. Advancing Women to Lead the Future of Security and Privacy. They were looking, they were doing some donations for something called Share the Mic in Cyber. So full disclosure, I gave $250 as a person to that, and they're looking to get their message out. So at the end of this, there's going to be a little PSA service announcement on how you can help out with that if you'd like to. It is a tax-deductible donation if you're interested in doing that. One thing to remember is some companies actually do matching. So if your company does matching, if you give $250 and you give the receipt to your company, they may match that. So I know companies like Microsoft and Google do that. Feel free to take up and take advantage of that if your company does that, because that's just double the money for them. So yeah, my company, Leviathan, does that up to $10,000. And my wife's company, Microsoft, of course, does matching as well. So feel free to reach out to your company and ask them if they do that, and hopefully they do that if you're so willing. So there will be a quick announcement. Actually, we're going to run that the entire month of July, so we're going to run it at the end this time. Next week we'll run it at the beginning. We'll try to mix it up, that way you're not you don't miss the PSA if you have information or questions about that. So there you go. Thanks to Rachel for sending that audio over to me so I can get it added. So let me see. Yeah, next week, cross your fingers, people. Should be the Ripple 20 authors. We're going to have the CEO of JSOF on to discuss those, and we'll talk a little bit about what it takes to engage a company that doesn't normally get engaged by InfoSec and what happened there, because it's going to be an interesting conversation, I think, with this guy. So that was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Be kind to one another, take care of yourself. Black Lives Matter, so get out there and donate some worthy causes. Take care of yourselves, because you only you have, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.